I once had a job that sucked, but at least nobody paid me to extract venom from snake bites with my mouth. Yeah, that was a real profession, and honestly, still not the worst gig on today's list. Your ancestors didn't have LinkedIn, but they had leech collector, tosher, and groom of the stool, a guy whose entire job was wiping the king's behind. And before you laugh, that guy was nobility. That's right, prestigious butt wiping. That guy basically had a corner office. We think we have it rough with bad bosses and pointless meetings, but imagine clocking in knowing your shift includes dodging exploding corpses, soaking in urine for hours, or crawling through sewage tunnels so tight you'd need to be half-starved just to fit. Today, we're diving into history's most nightmare-fueled jobs, the ones so disgusting, dangerous, and soul-crushing that modern HR would probably burst into flames and file a restraining order. No OSHA, no hazard pay, just survival, and maybe syphilis. Let's clock in. Imagine it's medieval England, and your house has a cesspit under it instead of plumbing. Every time someone drops a deuce, it falls into a brick-lined hole in the yard. Now, let's say that hole hasn't been emptied in years, just marinating like the world's worst stew. When it fills up, you hire a gong farmer. Gong meant cesspit, and these men were licensed by the city to empty them, usually between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m., because the smell could literally weaponize the air. Picture a guy lowering himself into a 10-foot pit with a shovel and a wooden bucket, standing knee-deep in fermenting waste that's been cooking all summer like something straight out of a nightmare. Methane and hydrogen sulfide built up inside, and records show workers sometimes suffocated from the fumes mid-shift. If you passed out, congratulations, you're now part of the pit. They hauled the waste away in carts to dump outside city walls or use as fertilizer, which really gives a new meaning to farm to table. They were paid better than many laborers, which tells you the risk was absolutely real. Yet they were forced to live on the outskirts of town, treated like walking biohazards. Medieval cities literally ran on their work. They just didn't want to smell it at brunch. And this is just sanitation. We haven't even gotten to people whose jobs was hauling actual corpses through the streets breakfast. Imagine it's 1348, and the plague has already taken half your street. The church bells don't stop ringing, and at this point you're like, all right, we get it. Doors that were open yesterday are nailed shut today with red or black crosses painted on them. Inside, entire families lie where they fell. Cities like Florence and London were losing thousands in months, and graves filled so quickly that officials ordered mass burial pits dug outside the walls. Then came the sound of wooden wheels on cobblestone, which was basically the ice cream truck jingle, except instead of popsicles, it's bodies. Plague collectors were hired to move the dead before the smell and rats made everything worse, walking street to street, ringing bells and calling for bodies like it's collection day. Families dragged bodies to the door, sometimes wrapped in linen, sometimes not, and collectors lifted them onto carts already stacked high like Jenga. They hauled them to the trenches where lime was thrown over the bodies before the next load arrived. There were no gloves, no masks, no real understanding of bacteria or anything remotely helpful. Some stuffed herbs in their mouth or held vinegar-soaked cloth to their faces, which is like bringing a squirt gun to a house fire. Most collectors were prisoners or completely broke because, surprise, surprise, handle plague victims all day wasn't exactly a dream job. We're only 2 jobs in, and somehow, dragging bodies around was the easy part. Ancient Rome gets a lot of credit for being advanced. What they don't mention is the bathroom situation, which was basically a group activity nobody asked for. Public latrines were long stone benches with holes cut into them, lined up side by side. No stalls, no doors, no personal space whatsoever. You sat there shoulder to shoulder with strangers, making eye contact during moments that should absolutely be private. Romans literally discussed politics and business deals mid-visit, which explains a lot about their decision-making, honestly. Under those benches ran open channels of waste that needed constant maintenance. Rome was packed, and the aqueduct water kept everything flowing, which sounds impressive until the whole system backed up like your uncle's toilet on Thanksgiving. When it clogged, latrine slaves had to climb down into the channels and clear blockages by hand. These slaves were captured and sold after Roman conquests like Gaul or Carthage. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's massive sewer, needed constant clearing. So, picture yourself wading waist deep through sewage in a stone tunnel, scraping years of buildup while toxic fumes tried to knock you out. If the gases didn't get you, the parasites would. Or maybe an infection from one tiny cut. These workers kept the waste flowing so Rome could function, which meant they spent every shift dealing with what the city discarded, while the people above them pretended civilization smelled like roses. And if you think that's the worst thing Rome soaked people in, wait until we get to leather. Leather was basically the backbone of the ancient world. It was used in belts, buckles, shoes, clothes, basically everything that needed to hold your life together without falling apart. And that meant somebody had to turn a fleshy skinned animal into something people could actually wear without gagging. Enter the tanner. The only guy in town who can make decent money and smell like a sewage plant collided with roadkill. The process was disgusting in a very systematic way. Rawhides came in bloody and stiff, and the first step was soaking them in vats of urine because ammonia loosens the hair. Yes, people literally sold their urine to tanneries like it was liquid gold. After that, workers scraped off leftover flesh and hair by hand, then dunked the hides again in mixtures that included animal brains, dog poop, or whatever else was available to soften them up. 12-hour shifts, elbow deep in fermenting substances, breathing fumes that could knock the life out of a room and probably ruin your chances of ever smelling normal again. The smell didn't clock out when you did. It went home with you. Into your clothes, into your hair, into your bed, probably into your dreams. Most tanners were born into guild families or trapped there by poverty. If your dad worked this job, chances are you were next in line. But hey, at least tanners were adults who could theoretically quit. Now we're about to talk about what happened when society decided children were the perfect size for certain jobs. Imagine it's 1805 in London, and you're a small, underfed 10-year-old just trying to exist, when some grown man squints at you like he's appraising livestock and goes, "Perfect, that one fits in a chimney." If you were poor, orphaned, or just inconveniently tiny, congratulations, you are now a climbing boy. Master chimney sweeps cruised workhouses and crowded slums like talent scouts, except instead of offering record deals, they offered a lifetime of serious health problems. Some parents got a few coins to apprentice their sons, which is basically selling your child but with a handshake and mild paperwork. Coal fires kept Britain cozy, and chimneys filled with thick soot that could burn entire houses down. So instead of redesigning chimneys to be wider, adults decided to send small children inside them like human cleaning brushes. The smaller you were, the better. Job requirement number 1, resemble a nervous ferret. You'd climb up pitch black brick shafts barely wider than your shoulders, scraping soot while it filled your lungs. If you got stuck or panicked, your boss might light a small fire underneath you for motivation. Nothing says teamwork like heat rising fast behind you. Long-term perks included chronic lung disease and a specific type of cancer so common it practically came with the job. Industrial Britain stayed warm, the kids definitely did not. And if you think that's traumatic, imagine your performance review includes execution techniques. Imagine it's 1620 and your boss wakes up, stretches and says, "Big day, 3 hangings and a beheading." And you're the assistant who has to pack the rope. Public executions weren't quiet moral lessons. They were events. At places like Tyburn, crowds rolled in early to get a decent view. Vendors sold food. Kids sat on shoulders. Up on the scaffold, it was less tidy. Imagine gripping the arms of someone who is desperately trying to pull away. Their wrists twist in your hands. Their breathing turns sharp and frantic against your sleeve. You feel every tremor. You tie the knots anyway. Before the long drop was standardized, a miscalculation meant someone might hang there far longer than expected. The crowd would shift, some would cheer, some would look away. You stayed. Beheadings weren't guaranteed to be clean either. A dull blade or a nervous swing could turn one strike into several. You were close enough to hear every shift in breathing. Afterward, you helped load the body onto a cart and scrub the scaffold before the next event. Sometimes there was more than one in a day. Efficiency mattered. Then you went home to the edge of town, because that's where people like you lived. Bakers hesitated, tavern doors closed a little sooner. The state needed your work, society preferred not to know you. From the square, justice looked decisive. On the scaffold, it felt heavy. But at least you guys went home clean. Some jobs followed you into your sheets. Imagine it's 1700 and your city's master sanitation plan is a wooden bucket and blind faith. No pipes, no flush, just gravity, regret, and you. All day long, families fill their household containers. They slap a lid on top like that's going to stop what's happening inside. When the bucket gets heavy enough to complain, they place it outside their door. Congratulations, that's your pickup. You're the night soil man, which sounds poetic until you realize it means you transport everyone's waste through dark alleyways. You work at night because daylight plus open buckets equals chaos. You shoulder a yoke with two sloshing tubs that absolutely refuse to stay calm. Cobblestones are slick. One wrong step and you're wearing the neighborhood's worst decisions. There's no HR department, just vibes. And maybe a hose, if you're lucky. You dump it into a cart already layered like the worst lasagna ever constructed, then you haul it beyond the city walls. Sometimes you sell it to farmers as fertilizer, which means yes, your cabbage has a backstory. The pay was slightly better than other jobs, which tells you everything. Toxic fumes could knock you out. Parasites saw you as the perfect host. Entire cities avoided drowning in their own waste because you carried it away in the dark. Civilization stood tall, while you smelled like it. But this is still better than what comes next. Now we leave the mud and step into the palace, because sometimes the worst job in England came with lace cuffs. Imagine it's 1535, and your official court title sounds impressive enough to impress your entire village. Groom of the stool. Very refined, very important. What it actually means is that when the king needs to use the toilet, you are on duty. And this isn't a random servant role. Under the Tudors, including Henry VIII, this position was often held by nobles, which means your prestigious family crest is now quietly associated with royal bathroom duties. This Tudor toilet was a padded box over a chamber pot. No plumbing, no ventilation system designed by angels. Just a small, enclosed space, heavy curtains, and the unmistakable aftermath of a royal feast heavy on meat and ale. And you did not step out for fresh air. You waited. You handed towels. You poured water. You cleaned up when necessary. So you were permanently attached to the most dangerous man in the country at his most irritable. Kings got cranky. Kings got sick. Kings blamed people. And you were the closest target in the room. Court politics were vicious. Rivals would love to replace you. One whisper, one misstep, one badly timed cough, and you could fall from trusted confidant to traitor remarkably fast. And while some jobs humiliated you publicly, others wore you down slowly. Imagine it's 1820 and you're 16 years old, climbing down into a narrow shaft before sunrise. The tunnel is damp, the air is thick, your candle barely cutting through the dust. Every swing of your pickaxe sends up a fine gray cloud that hangs there, waiting for your lungs. You breathe it in all day. Lead was essential. Cities wanted pipes that didn't rot. Armies wanted bullets. Builders wanted roofing. So you chipped it out of the earth while civilization congratulated itself on progress. The dust coats your skin, settles in your hair, slips past your teeth. Weeks turn into months. First, your stomach starts cramping so badly you double over in the tunnel. The older miners call it the colic, like it's a seasonal inconvenience. Then your hands begin to tremble when you try to grip your tools. You laugh it off. Everyone does. A few years later, you're in your 20s, but your memory feels decades older. You forget instructions. Your legs feel weak climbing ladders. Your thoughts move slowly, like they're wading through mud. And when you stumble or shake too much to work, the foreman says you're careless, maybe lazy. You can't leave. The town exists for this mine. Your father worked here. Your brother does too. The empire gets plumbing and ammunition. You get worn down early, long before the mine runs dry. Fast forward to the 1900s, and we're about to do something very similar, except this time the workers glow in the dark. It's 1918 and you finally scored a nice factory job. You're indoors, you're seated, you're not coughing up coal. You're painting tiny numbers on watch dials with this glow-in-the-dark paint that looks like liquid moonlight. The trick, your supervisor says, is lip, dip, paint. Shape the brush with your lips, dip it in radium, paint the number. Repeat. All day, every day. At first, nothing. You and the other girls go home faintly glowing. Dresses shimmer in the dark. Some of you even use it for fun before parties. Then your teeth start hurting. One gets pulled, the wound doesn't heal, your jaw feels weak. Dentists examine it and parts begin to deteriorate. Women started experiencing jaw necrosis, where the bone tissue slowly breaks down. Legs fracture without warning. 1 minute you're making dinner, next minute your body gives out. Turns out radium acts like calcium, so your body stores it in your bones where it continues to emit radiation from the inside. And the company? They knew radium was dangerous. They just didn't think it was dangerous for profits. Workers got sick, while the company blamed unrelated causes and avoided responsibility. History didn't run on heroes. It ran on people in tunnels and kids in chimneys. Most of them couldn't quit. When your choices are clock in or starve, you grab the shovel, the rope, or the glowing paint. So if your worst day involves awkward meetings and burnt coffee, you're already living like royalty. Now tell me in the comments, which job was the absolute worst? And which one would you really take if you had to? And stick around for more history that skips the perfume and tells you how it really smelled.